Well, today's webinar is focused on value-added livestock programs. And as consumers are desiring more and more information about how their food is produced, and having livestock participate in approved certification programs is one way to capture additional value at the time of sale and to recoup some of the costs. Today, we'll briefly review some of the commonly used livestock programs, discuss current and future programs that are available for producers. To discuss these programs' implications for producers, I'll be joined by Tom Brink, well-known in industry and currently CEO of Red Angus Association of America, and also Andrew Dorn, also well-known global product manager at Allflex Livestock Intelligence. So to begin, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about how those programs have paid out over time, and then we'll pass it to Tom and then on to Andrew. Let's go ahead and just talk about value-added programs, both from the cow-calf sector, the feedlot, and also we'll talk a little bit on how these programs play out in swine as well. One thing that's important to note is that markets work because prices transmit signals and incentives to producers. And these incentives are passed from consumers down to the wholesale, from wholesale down to people who actually raise the animals. And these signals are grouped, really transmit a whole bunch of information. I really like this slide from Lee Schultz at Iowa State, where he basically breaks what price is that a producer receives into really 4 basic components. You have your genetic components, you have some management, and your marketing characteristics, and really what the market is currently doing at the time. But there tends to be a lot of focus on a lot of genetic characteristics. As an economist, I tend to focus a lot over here in these market conditions. But today we're going to really be talking about these 2 middle ones, management characteristics and marketing characteristics, how we group animals, what are some of the programs that verify that an animal has been raised a certain way. So let's just talk about what are some of these that have specifically emerged in the sale barn. Do want to point out before is that supply, we talk about the supply and the demand often as economists, and really what we're talking about when we're talking about supply is, can we produce something? And most of the time is yes. We can produce, we can add more weight onto animals if the market's willingness to pay to retain animals. But the real question is, does the industry or consumers want us to produce the animals that way? And in particular, do feedlots want to receive animals a certain way? And I always bring up this idea, this Apple computer, where we have the technology to produce this computer on the left-hand side, but no one wants to buy that. Everyone wants to buy the one on the right. And that's because it has features and attributes that consumers currently desire. Not saying that that attribute over here on the left or that computer on the left wasn't useful at the time, but consumers change in what they desire. And this is true all along any consumer segment, and also along the beef supply chain and the pork supply chain. Feedlots want certain characteristics from feeder cattle. Packers want certain characteristics from fed cattle, and so on, and consumers want certain characteristics from wholesale. So one of these ways that particularly feedlots try to understand what are the genetics components is using color as a proxy. And this was a survey that was done of sale barns. Dr. Schultz from Iowa State, Dr. Duvetter from Kansas State. They're basically saying, what is affecting the sale of calf prices? And so compared to, the way we can read this is, compared to a black coat cattle, red-hided cattle, for instance, were discounted about $1 more. Red and white, so there's some mix, it was discounted by $4.50 per hundredweight, and so on and so forth. And so people, whether we are feedlot buyers at the time, are building in these premiums and discounts to cattle based upon trying to proxy. In this case, they were trying to proxy for breed or trying to proxy for genetics. And these, of course, varies through time. It could vary, could be high one year, it could be down year, but over this time period that they studied, these were kind of the average premiums and discounts. This is another example taken from a little later study in 2018. And the way that we can read this is if you have animals that come in that are small framed, they will receive a $6 discount per hundredweight compared to a medium framed animals. Well, we can do that for fill. Really what I want to focus on over here is this health. If animals, and there's some animals in there that come in that are not healthy, on average, across this time frame that the researchers studied, it was about a $6.30 per hundredweight discount on that lot of animals. And so as feedlots, they're trying to basically have this grouping of attributes that they think lead to high performance in the feedlot. The same thing could be true for pigs as they're coming up through finishing barns. And really what they're looking at, these are some of the attributes that they thought were the most important or very important, like they had to have these. And as you can see right there, frame, condition, whether they were castrated, were they just coming in off bulls or were they taking the time to castrate them? And then really what we'll focus on is some vaccination history, animal care handling practices. So people have these desires and attributes for animals, and then they're willing to either pay more for animals that have those attributes or less. And this has already happened in the market. And what we'll talk about a little bit today is certified programs just almost guarantee or send a signal to the buyer that, yes, it has these certain attributes. And so it builds a lot of these into these certification programs. To give you an idea of what this looks like, value-added programs have been around for a long time. They first really emerged in video auctions. This was some data that was taken looking at the Western Video livestock auction. And these researchers broke it down on what was the premium by year, what was the average premium across that. I really want to focus on just one to give you an example. Let's look at this natural for calves. The way we read this from 2004 to 2016, it was if animals were certified as all natural, they received a 1% increase over the dollar or the 130 per hundredweight. What we will notice here as we go down to the natural is that yearling cattle actually had larger premiums. And the question would be, well, generally we would assume as weight goes up, premium received goes down because of the price weight slide. But actually what they're building in there is saying, I can buy all natural cattle and they can be calves, but we know most of the animal health respiratory problems in feedlots, they occur between animals that are 450 pounds to 700 pounds. That's when most of the BRD cases occur. And so the fact that that animal is able to still be in the natural program as a yearling greatly reduces the risk. And so producers, feedlots are willing to pay more per weight. These premiums work. They don't stay the same every year, and they vary through time given market conditions. Right? So we can also see this at the feedlot level, from the feedlot to packer, and these are historical grid premiums that a producer would receive. So this red line is the prime premium, and over this time period, prime was trading at basically $13 per hundredweight on a carcass basis over choice. And we have this pink line here, which is the NHTC, non-hormone treated cattle, and the blue line, which is all natural. So on average, these two cattle were coming in, being graded as all natural or NHTC, then all natural cattle receive basically a $31 per hundredweight premium relative to these other programs. Just to show you that these principles are the same in both the cattle sector as in the hog sector. I went ahead and just showed you basically USDA collects weekly data from packers and saying, what did you pay for carcasses? To show you that premiums can vary through time, and as adoption increases or policies change in the industry, premiums can vary through time. I'll focus on this pork quality assurance, which basically became they assumed everyone had it, they're willing to pay lots for it, and then it just went to zero after there was widespread adoption. Another one that we're starting to see kind of unfolded, this is the beta agonist free, which is this red line here. Huge changes have happened with large processors saying we're not going to take animals that have been fed ractopamine. And a lot of that was to capture the Chinese market. And we've seen that premium continually decrease over time. So these premiums do change, and they change relative to policies or industry trends. Just to go show you that these premiums and discounts are actually passed down from the consumer, right? We produce beef, we produce hogs because consumers want us to produce these. This is an example of boneless steak strip. Basically the greenish line is organic premiums at the retail store, or how much it costs. And the red line is going to be how much it costs for just a conventional product. And really what you see here is that the premium for basically steak is about twice as much for an organic product versus a conventional product. But when you look at the relative to chicken is almost 3 times more. And it's not across every product, right? Ground beef, the premium's not so much. And so consumers desire these. Some of the issue that producers face is we have to produce the entire animal that's a certain way, and then consumers give premiums and discounts across basically the entire the different cuts. It seems like this pressure seems to be intensifying. There is growing and increased public scrutiny on, right or wrong about how animals are raised. And large companies are trying to meet consumers' needs, and they're trying to show consumers that they're making basically informed decisions on the way they procure their animals. Big ones is, I just pulled 2 of them. McDonald's is basically publicly stated and is working towards reporting progress against antibiotic reductions against their top 10 beef sourcing markets. The one that was recently picked up by drovers I think last week, was Wendy's had made basically the goal that by 2022, 50% of all their U.S. fresh, never frozen beef supply would come from basically certified feedlots that were fully traceable. And they updated the industry that in 2020, they had 40% of their fresh frozen beef coming specifically from a program called Progressive Beef. These will continue to, more programs like these will likely continue to show up. And to kind of talk a little bit through some of those programs, we're going to ask Tom Brink and to kind of share some of his insights and how he's seen the industry evolve over time.
Thank you, Elliott, and that was very good and set the stage very well for further discussion about value-added programs, because it is a trend that is going to continue to move forward. It's probably pretty easy to look around the industry, and I think most of you on this call, regardless of which segment of the business you're in, you would agree with that, because we see more information being provided on different groups of cattle as they enter the marketplace. It is pretty varied in terms of that information that is coming with the cattle. I've got a lot of gray hair, as you can see, and I remember when really all we talked about when we bought cattle in my previous cattle feeding life with a large organization, the Five Rivers organization, we bought an awful lot of cattle based on a weight, a projected shrink. We, of course, knew the location, so we calculated transport costs and maybe hide color, and that was honestly about it. And so that we lived on averages. It was a more of a commodity type approach. And of course, those of you that have been around a while know that our industry has done that for many, many years and continues to do that to some degree, but it is changing because we are in this business understanding that more information, especially the right kind of information, and certainly information that can come along with the value-added program, can really help us make a more informed buying decision. So if I'm a cattle feeder or if I'm a stocker operator and I'm looking to buy a set of feeder calves, I really want more information about what those animals are beyond just weight and hide color and location. And so we're seeing this trend continue. It covers a lot of different areas, and Elliott kind of spoke to that. I mean, think about the history of age and source back when the Japanese market was paying a substantial premium for cattle that were known to be under 30 months of age. Kind of the latter part of the previous decade, our numbers would suggest that we saw up to 2 million cattle in the beef industry that were verified for age and source and therefore qualified to Japan. That would have been the peak in 1 year. I think it was 2011 that we estimate that number peaked. And of course, it came down then after the Japanese, those premiums weren't there. But there's lots of different programs out there. And so there's age and source. A lot of these Elliott touched on, natural, NHTC. There's certainly some very good programs related to health verification of health programs and weaning programs like VAC 45 and VAC 60. You're seeing some now around nutritional programs. So if it's a set of calves that have been weaned, what nutritional programs, specifically have they been on for the 60 days they were weaned? Genetics and breed is also becoming more and more prominent. And it was Dr. Ken Odie from Kansas State University. He's just the recently retired former department head of animal science at my alma mater, K-State, who said this. He said, the last 20 years have really been about animal health. In our feeder calf market, it's been about health, and rightly so. Health is always number one. But he said, he went on to add this, I thought very insightful. He said, the next 20 years will be about genetics. And so genetics are becoming more and more prominent. And so that leads us, I think, if you're a cow-calf operator on this call, you might do a little self-review of your herd. And this is something when we talk to people and they say, well, I'm hearing value-added programs is something I need to look at. Maybe they don't even know where to start. They don't really even know what that means until they've taken some time to explore it. But probably the first thing that you should do as a cow-calf producer is make an assessment of your herd, make an assessment of your calf crop, and think about what you have, what the resources you have in terms of what is unique, maybe what is notable and marketable about those calves, starting with potentially a very good health program. And some cattle sell, and when the description is written, whether they're selling through the auction market, a direct trade, on the video, whichever way they're selling, a detailed health program, treatments and treatment dates specific to that can add value. If you have a good health program, whether you actually go through a third-party verified program or not, that information can definitely add to the value of those calves, because again, the buyers want to know. They want to know what those calves have been treated with coming in. So what is the base in your herd from a value standpoint that you can build on? What is unique and positive about your calf crop? And then think about different types of value-added programs that you might plug into. And here's a thought. If you have a relatively healthy calf crop year after year, that your calves are just staying healthy, you're not treating that many, maybe there's always some, But if it's not a problem, if health is not a problem as a rule in your herd, you might think about a natural program because you probably won't have a lot of fallout. You probably won't have to treat a lot of calves. On the other hand, if somebody struggles with health in their calves, they're probably not a great candidate for a natural program. Here's another one. If my calves are pretty growthy, I can wean big calves. They have strong genetics for growth. They're going to weigh up at weaning. My grass is typically good. That's always a variable. I hear you guys got a lot of snow in Nebraska, so that's going to put some moisture in the ground. That's a good thing. But if your calves are big and stout and they don't really maybe need an implant, they're getting there on genetics, maybe NHTC is for you. So there's those kinds of things you can consider and look at, and also look at the breed related programs and the genetics related programs that are out there. Do your calves have genetics that are recognizable and that have value as they enter the marketplace, whether that is a program like Top Dollar Angus, or in the Red Angus Association, we have a sire breed, a 50% documentation of Red Angus cattle. If they're sired by Red Angus bulls, they can go into our feeder calf certification program. They can be crossbred cattle, but if they have that documented Red Angus sire, they can go into our feeder calf certification program, and that program typically does garner a premium, and it's pretty inexpensive and really pretty easy to get into. So those are kinds of things to think about with your calves. And back to health for a minute, you know, is your health program so good it should be promoted? And I guess I said some of that, but make sure that you're thinking about not just implementing a good health program. And this is the case with all of these different types of value-added certifications that we're talking about. It's not just about doing the right thing, it's about documenting what you do. And there was a really good older guy that I worked with a long time ago when I worked for Cattle Facts, who was at NCBA at the time. His name is Roger Berglund, and he said something I never forgot. He said, the essence of good PR, so the essence of good public relations, you could almost say the essence of good marketing. Here's what he said. He said, do something good and then go tell people about it. And I never forgot that because it's so simple. It's easy to remember, and he's right. We have to do something good, maybe something a little extra in our herds. We have to collect that information and document the good work that we do, whether it's related to health or genetics or other types of programs that we may want to fit our calves into. And then certainly we want to go tell people about it. And we want marketing partners who will help us with that. And so as you think about the different marketing partners maybe you have used in your operation, that might be the local auction, that might be the video, that might even be the internet, maybe it's direct trade, or maybe you even have relationships with people that have bought your cattle direct in the past. So no matter how you market your cattle, it does us all a lot of good to sit and think, is this partner really doing the things that I need them to do? Are they recognizing, if you are in a value-added program, or you could be, are they giving you information? Or they should be a resource in terms of market information, what is paying, what maybe isn't paying as much, which programs are working in your area, what they see other people doing, other producers doing, because you can learn a lot from looking around. And those marketing partners, as I'm calling them here, should be a good source of information to help you as well. And that's never a bad question to ask them. What do they see other people doing that they work with, and what is being successful? So, and they also, secondly, those marketing partners need to be committed to you. They need to be really motivated to help you. And they also, I think with the trend that we're seeing and what we're discussing here today with more value-added programs, I think they need to be on board with that. They need to be maybe part of that movement. They need to be willing to support it and really be clear. And when a group of cattle come into the ring and they're different because they've got 2 or 3 different verifications on them, they need to be willing to really speak to that specifically and the added value points that your group of cattle are bringing because they have these certain value added programs behind them. And if they really aren't, if they'd rather not talk about that because that might make somebody else's cattle look less than yours, that probably is not a place to stay plugged into long term, because you really, if you're going to do the extra work to find out which value added program you want to get into, and then to go ahead and execute that. Maybe it's a third party verification program where you have to spend a little bit of extra money to qualify into that program and to carry the badge that goes with that program. Then if that's the case, you certainly want a marketing partner that will stand in with you and make the most of those verifications that you're bringing with your cattle when they go to market. So those are really the things that I wanted to say, Elliott. I hope that makes sense, but we are seeing what we believe is a very solid long-term trend to growth in many of these kinds of programs. And certainly there's some out there that probably will ebb and flow a little bit, but the general trend is that we, as buyers, they want to know more about the cattle they're buying, and cattle are tending to sell with more information. I think the industry is understanding more and more every year just how important that is. And so it's good for each producer to think about where they are within all of that discussion and potentially which programs they can fit into.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate you sharing with us. We'll go into Andrew.
See my screen? Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want to just do PowerPoint.
Yeah, I thought it was. There we go. Is it in the right mode or no?
No, not yet, Andrew.
No.
You want to just swap those displays, and I think we'll be in business.
How's that?
There we go.
Perfect. Well, thank you both, Elliott and Tom. You kind of summarized all those programs well, and I guess I could probably end and save everybody a lot of time by saying I concur. But no, I'm going to give you a little perspective from a technology company's view and some of the drivers we see, which are in addition to one, and then some of the tools that are evolving to help with some of these data transfers. So quick clarification, so nobody's confused, Allflex is now part of the Merck family, under the Merck Animal Health Intelligence family. So that's why you see that there on the power. Obviously, we see more transparency pieces across the value chain and data sharing up and down the chain, from cow-calf to packer all the way to consumer. There's an aspiration around that, and that's going to continue to increase. I think we're all seeing the farm labor starting to it's diminishing, so we need better tools for automation, etc. Less resources are going to be available to us, and those trends they enable the broader use of technology, and we're hoping to drive value with them at the operational level. So cow, calf, feedlot, every stage of the game in production. Hopefully these tools are driving value as well as creating continuity. Cool snippet here. This is kind of this was a real world traceability piece for me once. On the menu, you see Creekstone, Kansas USDA Black Angus beef. They're on the menu in London at the Marriott. Kind of an interesting thing for a farm kid from Nebraska to see a while ago, and that brings a lot of things into perspective, right? So consumers are wanting to know more about that. If we look at the survey that was conducted in, I think, 2016 and Sullivan, the big thing here that correlates to that menu is 2 out of the 3 consumers think it's very or somewhat important to understand how their food is produced. It's a pretty big number, isn't it? I mean, that's an interesting fact. They're wanting to know more. That leads us to a motivation to evolve, right? And this paper trail. That's my prey checklist in 2017 here at house. You can see my handwriting is terrible. You can see that there's blood manure on it, and it's been folded and probably in my pocket. And we need to provide better tools to move that from paper to electronic, right? And that's, that's some of the things that we see doing. We see the trend growing along with all the pieces. We see electronic identification growing in programs, but also in management programs and tools. A lot of those programs that Tom mentioned, they may require an electronic identifier or some sort of identification device that goes along with it to identify those animals. And as that trend grows and as we evolve, we come with new tools and new data, to increase data integrity. We've got, there's apps out there. There's not only we have this very limited app of Allflex's, but I think there's some associations with data collection apps. There's management tools with data collection apps that pair with electronic ID readers. There's barcode readers that are on EI readers now that you can correlate different things, whether it be a tissue sample or a blood sample, maybe a hair card for DNA. And all these things can be combined into, a broader use case, not only for down the value chain and maybe things such as a breed association, maybe you're registering them with Tom, but you can start to create value on your farm with that information as well, right? And bringing all those pieces together. We see a growing trend in that in the electronic identification space. Kind of where we see the future, what it's looking like. I think, Tom and Elliott both spoke a little bit to this, but precision agriculture has been around a long time for grain farming. I think we'll see precision livestock, and hopefully as we trend into that, we see value added services that come along with it, right? And inventory management with electronics, health monitoring, right? Whether it be an ear device or different technologies, traceability, whether that be with a ear tag, maybe it's DNA traceability, all those pieces, but combining those to drive value not only for more transparency and traceability, but drive value for everyone on the operation as well. And ultimately, it brings us to the conception to consumption story, right? And being able to have data points, and each one the points of an animal's life, and able to tell that story on down the chain. And I think this picture is yet to come. However, the aspiration of our customers, who are ultimately the consumers in the livestock world, they are wanting to aspire to more of these. And I guess to speak more, towards what Tom was saying and Elliott said, as consumers want more information for the food that they're eating, I am inherently, and I think we all are, interested in not only providing them with that, but providing value on farm while we do that, right? Creating more value, whether it be into a program like Tom was talking about, a natural program, the aspiration and price premium for a natural program being high, but drive value back to your own operation with that. I think Tom used a perfect analogy. If you have healthy cattle, what are you out, right? And utilizing those resources and being able to drive value while we're connecting the food chain. And I think that's the ultimate goal, and along with electronic management. I know that was quick, Elliott. I told you it would be, but I think we'll, take some questions and see what people have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Tom. Just so everyone's aware, we will be posting kind of just a brief synopsis of this at farm.unl.edu, just summarizing the main points that we've talked about today. And we'll also have just a quick 15-minute podcast that you can download if you want to come and re-listen to some of the highlight points. And of course, this will be available. And both Andrew's, Tom's, and my personal information will be made available, so you can reach out directly if you have other questions. But one thing I wanted just to reiterate was that the reason why we can have these value-added programs is because consumers are willing to pay premiums for these. And so those premiums from the retail and from the consumers ultimately are passed down along the supply chain. And then we can develop programs and technology to verify and monitor that. So two questions, or a couple questions here that came in. Tom, why don't you take this first one? Does this, or let's just, I'll have you do this one. What is the best way for a small producer to share this information forward? Why don't you go ahead and address that if you could? So once you have this information, what's the best way to share that?
It's harder for it's harder for sub-load lot groups to really get as much value out of that information. Let's just be candid about that. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it, because when you think about it, I'm going to make an assumption here. It's not 100% true. But let's say that somebody has 30 head of steers to sell every year, and you're doing a good job on your genetics, your health, you've got some bells and whistles on them. They're maybe even in a program potentially, but you can't really sell those as a load. And so that limits your options in terms of marketing. You can still, though, find a marketing partner, and it's probably going to be a local auction, that will stand behind you and will make sure that the value points that you have brought with those cattle are communicated to everybody that is buying cattle there that day. And that includes not only, the good news is that includes not only those in the ring, but it also more than not includes those buying online, because of course we're seeing more and more of that. But I want to make a point with that is if I'm an order buyer sitting in a given auction, and I am most likely working for a feed yard to buy to their specs, load lots of cattle. And if I see 20 or 30 head of uniform, top quality cattle that have some documentation behind them, maybe they're in a program that I'm seeking, maybe I know more about them, I'm going to put those on my load. I want to go back and report to my feed yard manager and say, yeah, I bought you 3 loads today, and several of them had some smaller groups that were really top notch. And they were very value added, and they pulled the average up of what I bought. Now, he's not going to say that, but it's a good thing that they do. And so there's still, you can make the effort to find and work with those, in most cases, local auction partners that will communicate the value points of your calves, so that even if it's a smaller group, so that the buyers know what they're getting. And if it's what they're looking for, they're going to be interested in knowing and probably interested in bidding more on those calves.
Tom, why don't you go ahead and this is kind of jointly with it, and you started talking towards it towards the end, but how do you motivate your marketing partner that you're working with to basically advertise that and to get the most from your calves?
I think this is a place in general where we as producers can be proactive with them and saying, what will you do for me? I mean, they are working for us in selling our animals. They're going to get a commission. And so find out in advance how much they're willing to showcase the positive information and the programs that you're bringing forward with your cattle. If they don't really respond to that, if they aren't willing to do it to your satisfaction, maybe it's time to look for a different marketing partner. So those would be some things that I would suggest, but just be proactive with it. And I think more and more from local auction markets, certainly to other venues, the marketers are taking that seriously, because they want the best customers, and the best customers are the ones bringing in these value-added cattle. They want to keep selling those cattle, certainly. And so they need to do some extra work for that. And so that's a conversation you should have with your marketing partner, if it's more than one, well in advance of when you sell your cattle. Just tell them what your plans are, tell them what you're going to bring, and ask them how will they help you promote that information, that valuable information, and those value-added programs right along with the cattle themselves.
Thank you, Tom. This is a question for you, Andrew. Does this information that people are listing have to come through a third-party verification for it to be valid, or can a producer just say they have these attributes? Maybe talk a little bit about between someone saying that they have these attributes versus it being verified.
Yeah, I mean, there's good points, Elliott, where you can say that you have a all natural, etc., but that animal is not verified through a third party, and thus, it may not be, it can't be sold through a retailer in that marketing program, right? So yes, the answer is, but there's also, there's dependencies around it. If I'm selling a beef to you or my neighbor, and I say, hey, Elliott, this animal's, I've never given it, antibiotics, etc. It's natural, no hormones. That's one thing. However, if we're selling it to a larger groups, to an entity, and they're going to pass that down off onto a retailer, then it needs to be in more of a verified type of program, right?
Thanks, Andrew. And maybe Tom, did you want to comment on that?
I was going to add to that. I think it does depend on what specific type of attribute that we're talking about here. I mean, there's some programs that obviously require verification. There's quite a few areas where third-party verification is better than not, and other places where some information from the producer themselves that's not necessarily verified or certified third party is going to help too. But just think about it this way. Let's take health for a second, something that Andrew knows a lot about in his background and his company. How many of us, in fact, probably all of us, have sat in an auction barn and a group of calves comes through and they said they've had all their shots, right? That's the classic one-liner. That phrase means less and less, doesn't it? Because we don't know anything about what that means. Or if we have a set of a certain color calves and they say, these are really good genetics, what do we know about that? I mean, they're good compared to what? Have they been quantified? Have they been verified? So I think we're gradually moving into an era where more of the strongest programs that you could potentially be a part of will be verified programs. But that's not 100% the case. And certainly maybe it starts with a person that has been selling more commodity type cattle into the marketplace without a lot of information, to add some information, some valuable information, and sell those calves that way. And maybe that's a precursor, getting started approach for working toward more value added programs that are third party verified. So I think that the trend is set in that the verifications, mostly third party, are going to dominate more and more in the years ahead.
Thank you, Andrew. Tom, maybe a question for both of you. There's probably producers who are listening to this that think, this is great. I feel like I have good health, or I maybe have, cattle that are feeder cattle that I can wean really nicely. And how does someone go about becoming certified, or how do they weed through all of that, and maybe talk through some of the dollars and cents of you find a program, how much does it cost, and what's the annual fees, and maybe kind of talk through producers a little bit about that. We'll start with Andrew, and then we'll go to Tom.
Yeah, that's going to start with Tom, but I'll go at it. He's probably a little closer to the vest on costs, etc. Providing them. For me, that's right. It's researching, do your research, finding that partner, decide what best fits your operation, and once you do that, then you start seeking out costs. For my side, or the cost side, you can assume that an EID tag, it might cost anywhere from $2 to $3, and then the program cost in addition that I'll let Tom talk towards. But really, it's more advice from me is do your research. There's so many of them out there, and see what fits you best. Make it easy for you, especially on the first go round. There's audits, etc., and find the partner and go with it. Tom, I'll let you talk more towards the cost. You're a little closer to the vest there.
Yeah, there's a wide variation, of course, in cost of the various programs. Maybe I'll come back to that in a second. But as far as, and Andrew said it there, I mean, you just start out talking maybe to your veterinarian about what programs that they may even work with. If it's a VAC 60 type program, VAC 45 or something along those lines, then find out about that. I mean, you ought to call, if you're working with a certain breed or breeds, call those associations and ask and find out about, if you don't know, find out about what marketing programs and tagging programs they have. A lot of those are pretty inexpensive. I mean, probably $3 or less a head. The Red Angus feeder calf certification program is really only $1 a head for that tag. So it's pretty inexpensive. And so there's some simple ones. There's some more challenging ones as far as like NHTC. That's a once a year audit, an on-site audit. Maybe it's IMI Global or somebody else that would execute that audit. But you can, the first thing is to give those folks a call. So it would be the veterinarian, an animal health representative in your area, maybe a breed representative that's your breed and your area representative, talk to them, and or some of the other companies actively involved in various programs out there, like Top Dollar Angus would be another example. So don't be bashful in just calling those folks and saying, please tell me about your program. Here's my situation, my cattle, and what possibly could work. And those people are, I'm sure in all cases, willing to educate you a little bit on what they're doing. And the costs will vary quite a bit, and you can find out about that as well. But that's the homework and the legwork, as well as, and I shouldn't not say that be sure to do a little work online too. Do a little bit of Googling and find out what you can learn about different programs that you may be a part of, and coming back to talk to your marketing partner. Maybe that's the local auction barn manager. Talk to them and see what they know about different programs. Again, restating this, that have been successful in the area, because they are working with a lot of producers. They see quite a few things. So that's a good conversation to have as well.
Thank you, Andrew and Tom. Reminder, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A box. One of the questions that I get a lot is when I go and talk about either value-added programs or showing what the market is doing, has a lot to do with, we're collecting all this information. If it's in my, red notebook, I basically know all that information, and maybe talk about some data privacy concerns. How is this information shared? Who actually has access to this information? And that's a legitimate question, right? Because if this is your business and you have basically proprietary information about how you raise animals, or maybe talk through a little bit about the data privacy concerns that might be as we're going electronic.
Yeah, so that's always that's a really good question, and I always start it with there's two pieces. There's data and there's information, as you said, and to me they're very segmented, right? So 0, 6, 12, 94 to you, Elliott, is a number, right? That's a piece of data. To me, that's information. That's my wife's birthday, right? So when you take data points and you combine those, that turns into information. And I don't think that there's, when we're talking about our production data and records, etc., two pieces of the puzzle have to come together to make any information. And I think the concern is relevant. However, there's all kinds of data privacy laws that we have to adhere by, and not only in our company, but when you're enrolling into programs and etc. That that data is of the ownership of the animal, and you know, the company doing audits that also have to have guidelines around it. So I think it's always a valid question. It's always a valid concern. However, I don't think that the problem exists of today of how we are putting those data points out there, because so many data points have to come together to make information about an individual, right?
No, I can add a little bit to that. Andrew gave a really good answer there. I mean, if you think about the information we share, and I'm kind of speaking to groups of cattle that we're offering to the marketplace, and then those cattle are purchased by somebody downstream that's ultimately going to probably put them in a feed yard and so forth. Most of those transactions or that exercise is what I'll call transactional. It's not necessarily part of a full-blown supply chain that's integrated from one end to the other, although we do have more of those in the industry all the time, and that is a general trend. But so if you think about those transactional elements, I think the data and information that is shared when a group of cattle sell, most of that is not proprietary. It's not sensitive information. And so you will want to put it out there if it adds value to your cattle and makes them more attractive. You'll want to put it out there with them without concern that, hey, if somebody knows I'm using Merck Animal Health products, that's not anything I really care about. So that's the kind of thing you can think about, though. If you are part of a more full-blown alliance, then probably two things to go with what Andrew had shared. Number one, make sure you know what information is getting shared from your operation about your cattle and so forth. Make sure you're generally comfortable with it. And maybe more important than that is to know your downstream partners, know who you're working with. They've got to be people that you can trust. Typically, as Andrew said, it's not something to worry about because those folks are interested in the big picture, the downstream supply chain people, the feeders, the packers that may have integrated relationships. That's what I'm talking about. They're going to be more interested in large numbers of cattle and making that whole program successful, which if I am a part of that, then I may get some information back from them. That's going to help me too. So it's a relationship business. We all understand that in the cattle industry. We've got to know our partners, and certainly, I mean, just like in all of our businesses, you pick your partners carefully. And sometimes if you have a bad experience, then either you can fix it or you move on and develop a different relationship. And so I don't think it's a lot different than what most of our producers in all segments are used to doing. It's just a matter of thinking about information that is going to add value to your cattle and help you succeed in a greater way in the marketplace.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, Andrew. That's really great. Probably our last question here briefly refers a little bit what we talked about before. About, let's say you're a small cow-calf producer. 25 cows is pretty average, right? 25 to 50 is the average cow-calf herd. How do they take advantage of these programs if they feel like maybe the costs are maybe higher than what they can observe in the marketplace? What are some ways that we might address some of those concerns? Maybe we'll start with Tom and then go to Andrew.
It is, as we've said, it is harder in smaller herds, but I do encourage smaller herds to focus on really producing quality calves and make them as uniform as you possibly can. One of the things we always tell people is make them all the same color or the same colors and make them all look alike. Now that seems like a real simple thing, but I'll guarantee you if you're selling 20 head of steers on a given day and they come in the ring and they're all basically fall within a weight range that they can be sold as one group and they're all the same color, they all look the same, they are worth more than if those things were not true about that same 20 head. So that's certainly something that you should think about. And I really feel like it's maybe some of the lowest fruit we have in this industry for smaller producers is they too can create uniformity and they too can get some benefit from that. I think the other thing to think about there is that can you partner with somebody? Is there another producer that's your neighbor, maybe 10 miles down the road or whatever it is, that is also a small producer that you can combine animals with and sell a larger group? If you're doing same genetics, same type of health program, and really just grow the numbers, because it is true that critical mass speaks in this industry. It always will, although at the same time, we have sold through all of our value-added programs that I'm involved with. We have sold a lot of one load lot groups, and sometimes it is combined, producers to get to a load. But if you can create one load, here's the thing that a lot of people I find don't know. If you can create one load of relatively uniform cattle, and that means probably less than a 300-pound weight range from heaviest to lightest, hopefully 250 or even less, but 250 is a good place to be. If you can create one load, you have access to what I consider to be some of the very best markets and people in the industry that are buying feeder cattle, and whether that be a stocker or a feedlot, either one. And so I'm speaking more to the cow-calf side here on this smaller herd, but that's something that if you can somehow partner with some folks to create a load, you have opened up your world to a lot more market access. One other thing, I guess I keep thinking of one other thing here, Elliott, quickly. Keep them in the right weight range. That's important too. Don't make them too big, and don't, for the most part, you won't want to sell them too small. And to me, that is kind of probably the 500 to 550 on the lighter end. 600 is better for, get them up to 600 pounds, and then kind of 950, not heavier than that, maybe even 900 pounds. That's the sweet spot. You'll face the best demand between 600 and 900 pounds. If I get a lot of 1,000-pounders and off Nebraska grass in the summertime, you will get a lot of those big cattle, and some people will buy them. But the heavier they get, the market demand kind of shrinks, and same on the light end. So that's something that no matter what size producer you are, you can think about, and it can help you.
Yeah, and to add to that, I would say utilize the flexibility you have as a small producer, right? Utilize AI to get that uniformity, to get those genetics into your cows. Utilize management practices. Utilize the neighbors, like Tom said. Get a group of people and get some uniformity. Buy semen together. Utilize those resources. The other thing that I would say is think about, maybe we don't take them maybe we find a feeder that's willing to feed your 25, 30, 40, 50 head of calves in a pen with some other ones. Think outside the box and utilize the flexibility that you're able to do. And, finding that feeder that you can feed them all the way through the value chain, or all the way through the feeding period. Heck, then you can have naturals, NHTCs. You take all the credit for that that you can get, and thing, right? Just utilize all those flexible points. That'd be my last point for you, Elliott.
Thank you, Andrew. Tom, I think those are great points. That one of the things that that I see a lot of value added is retained ownership through the if you feel like you're not getting those premiums, and you feel like your animals are grading really well at the feedlot, performing well at the feedlot and grading well at the packing plant, sometimes there's value in retaining ownership through and doing some custom feeding. Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Andrew, for presenting, and thank you everyone else for joining us today. As I mentioned, a recording of the webinar will be posted at farm.unl.edu, and that's where you can register for more upcoming webinars. Next week will be another topic on traceability in livestock and what producers are actually willing to pay for both mandatory and voluntary traceability programs. Also, you'll receive a short survey in the email, and we really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar and input for future webinars. Thanks again, Tom. Thanks again, Andrew. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.